keep my eye out for her to log in.
Okay, thank you very much. And this is regular public comment, not comment on the mayor's proposed budget. We'll do that next. So first, I would like to call on April Taylor. And if you'll state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Welcome.
April Taylor. I live in James Brown's district. The last few weeks have been filled with headlines that drive home just how much Lexington citizens want council and city officials to act when it comes to implementing changes that will bring accountability and transparency to the Lexington Police Department. From the March 30th injuring of Liam, who LPD was performing a welfare check on, when Officer Nicholas Gray weaponized his cruiser against Liam and left him with a brain bleed and other serious injuries. LPD's inability to be forthcoming with information in this and so many other cases underscores why council must implement a rule requiring LPD to release unedited full body camera footage within 3 days of a critical or use of force incident. Otherwise, council cannot call it a success to have equipped all officers with body cameras. What good is footage that no one but LPD is allowed to see and then edit prior to release? Officer Jervis Middleton has also rightfully filed suit against LPD for his wrongful termination. This lawsuit brings many troubling things to light, including the violation of his rights to due process during the disciplinary procedures, the violation of his and protesters' First Amendment rights, and the uncovering of a deeply racism that the current complaint and disciplinary processes have obviously been unable to adequately remedy. A Herald Leader article regarding Officer Middleton's lawsuit reveals that the record of complaints about racism from Lexington officers proves this. Only 2 of 30 complaints from Lexington citizens about racial bias were taken seriously. Separating the complaint process from LPD, allowing citizen input in the investigatory phase of discipline would reassure citizens that these complaints are taken as seriously as they should be. LPD's continued employment of racist and abusive officer Jesse Maskow further erodes any trust the public has in LPD's ability to oversee complaint and disciplinary processes in a fair and unbiased manner. In 1 year, this officer had 16 different complaints about racism from citizens. 75% of his stops in a 2-year period were of Black citizens, but Lexington's Black population is only 14%. He is even still employed after wrongfully imprisoning a Black man that the jail told him was not the right person associated with an arrest warrant. Why is he still on the force, but Middleton, who simply tried to report racism, is not? Why was a white chaplain who beat a Black autistic teenager on video allowed to retire with a full pension and 4 different types of open formal complaints against him from multiple citizens, but a Black officer is fired for being tired enough of racism to stand up for himself? Why were protesters arrested using faulty affidavits and search warrants as part of LPD's witch hunt?
Thank you very much. Next is Emma Anderson. If you'll turn your video on, please. And if you'll state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Emma Anderson. I'm in Council District 6. I also have concerns about accountability in the police department, and I would like City Council to act on that. There have been numerous incidences in the last, historically a long time, but in the last even two months, the injury of Liam Long, a Black autistic teenager, and the incident in the Fayette Mall with another autistic Black teenager. And I find that not only do these cases highlight the need for accountability in the police department and rebuilding of trust with the public and the police department, but also it highlights how desperately we need to fund paramedicine program and the New Vista crisis response team, and that would allow them to be more fully support calls for welfare checks and for people that have different or who are in distressed mental states. That is something that is really important to me in my own experiences, knowing that the people that are called to respond to a situation with somebody who's distressed will not end in injury or death. That is something that should not be happening, and the city should prioritize fixing that problem and putting funding into programs like New Vista and crisis response training rather than funding new citizen outreach positions that I don't think will adequately address the problems.
Thank you, Emma. Next is James Woodhead. Welcome. If you'll
Hello.
state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is James Woodhead, and I'm in District 3. I'm commenting to voice my support for the ordinance banning the use of no-knock warrants by the Division of Police. While the state provided some restrictions with Senate Bill 4, the ordinance rightly acknowledges that it did not go far enough. With Kentucky being a castle doctrine state, no-knock warrants are at a heightened risk of resulting in tragedy. I believe it is in the best interest of not only civilians, but also the safety of law enforcement officers to follow Louisville's lead and pass Breonna's law. However, I'm concerned about the amendment from Councilmember Bledsoe that removed the provision stating that officers wait 15 seconds after knocking and announcing before entering. I believe Louisville is correct with their language, which states wait a minimum of 15 seconds or for a reasonable amount of time for occupants to respond, whichever is greater, before entering. Without this language, I worry that we leave the door open to loopholes that may be exploited and potentially continue to place people in harm's way. What stops warrants from being knock and instantly enter? Hypothetically speaking, will the battering ram count as knocking? Since this would also seemingly be exempt from the restrictions found in SB 4, what happens if police knock and immediately enter at night while the occupants are sleeping in a castle doctrine state? I was also alarmed by Chief Weather's comments made at Tuesday's Planning and Public Safety Committee meeting. He was quick to make multiple defensive statements, as have many chiefs across the country, claiming that his department is accountable, that supposedly history proves these warrants are safe, wanting us to believe that exceptions referring to Louisville are not the rule, and he demanded that we stop focusing on what happened elsewhere and focus on what has happened here. His comments sounded eerily familiar to LPD officer and recent FOP president Jonathan Bastian, who claimed LPD was exempt from calls for accountability and problems with systemic racism. Thanks to now former LPD officer Jervis Middleton, we know that was not true. If we want to focus on what has happened in Lexington, why was the botched no-knock warrant from December of 2015 here in Lexington not mentioned, when LPD smashed through an innocent man's front door with his family, including his children, asleep in the house, tackled him to the ground, and placed him in handcuffs? Shockingly, their critical incident report states that the man was verbally non-compliant. After realizing they raided the wrong house, they left a damaged front door and a 6-figure settlement for taxpayers. Just 3 months prior to that botched no-knock warrant, LPD officer Adam Ray received less than a 1-week suspension after he illegally entered a dwelling without any search warrant at all. I ask that you listen to the recommendation from the Commission for Racial Justice and Equality, Black faith leaders, and hundreds of your constituents that were in the streets for over 50 days of sustained protest last summer following the murder of Breonna Taylor. Pass Breonna's law, ban no-knock warrants, and include adequate provisions, including the minimum 15-second wait time.
Thank you very much, James. Next is Garrett Gabriel. If you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Garrett Gabriel, East 6th Street, address on file, Councilmember James Brown. Thank you, Mayor Gordon. I want to thank the council for hearing me now as y'all heard me in February. I want to thank Councilmember Lamb for extending my time then and Councilmember Ellinger for seconding it. I was anxious and troubled by what I had read the week leading up to that meeting regarding the collective bargaining agreement as written by the Lexington Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 4 in this moment. I am no less anxious nor less troubled by the document. The difference this time is I came with something typed rather than relying on written notes. To be quite honest, in getting all my references together, I forgot about my time restraint. Before I get into re-outlining what I outlined before, I'd like to remind Council that Mr. Barbary of the Law Department suggested there are 3 collective bargaining agreements, one for officers and sergeants, one for lieutenants and captains, one for chiefs, assistant chiefs, and the like. What I read was a 60-page document primarily regarding the lieutenants and captains with a 30-page appendix focused on employees most generally, which I presumed to be officers. As far as I'm concerned, much of the intricacies of the department was outlined in that document, including benefits and disciplinary practices. But if there are more documents, I invite that they make those documents public, just as I invite that they make formal complaint form 111 public. At Duncan Park's Peace Walk, Chief Weather spoke passionately about, quote, getting on the same page. The public cannot do that if these pages themselves are not public. Just so I don't go over my allocated time, I'd like to remind you of the discriminatory articles. Article 14, Section 4 in Health and Safety, quote, no member shall be required to work in excess of 15 hours consecutively. Provided, however, any member may waive this section shall not apply to Roots and Heritage Festival, New Year's Eve events, 4th of July, and in exigent circumstances or other similar events as designated by the chief. I ran into a lawyer friend of mine not too long ago, and they mentioned how this specific language might be arbitrary and pernicious, a phrase with its own legal precedent in our state. As a side note, I'd like to point out that the continued use of the language in exigent circumstances, the public safety meeting on Tuesday. To me, it sounds like chief could deny an officer's request off just as easily as he could make a knock warrant 15 seconds or 5 seconds or 2 seconds, as he said to Councilmember Reynolds when defending the new edit to the ordinance, a shameful edit proposed by Councilmember Bledsoe in the last moment of the meeting, seconded by Councilmember Ellinger. Speaking of, I call that the 15 to 20 second accommodation be added back to the legislation. The potential entrapment of men who have sex with men in Article 23, Section 3, paid and unpaid leaves. Quote, a member may request up to 4 hours leave with pay to donate blood during regular work hours at any licensed blood center certified by the FDA. It is still a Class D felony for a man who has sex with men to donate blood within 3 months of the occurrence. All it would take was a group of officers to encourage a group blood donation following a known sexual interaction by a gay or bi officer to entrap said officer. And yet there are allegations of Officer Ryan Holland sending lewd images on the job, for instance. Who does this document serve? I'd like to add that I myself, a trans woman, if I am granted that, would be discriminated against by Article 40 on gender. But rather than spending the limited time I have advocating on my own behalf, I'd like to point out that these de jure discriminations are essentially our country's racist and homophobic histories being spoon-fed back to us, written by officers in the local officer fraternity. They could be edited out, and they should be, but I'd like to see real and meaningful change, such as LPD's accountability's demands specifically.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Next, yes, next is Sarah Williams. Sarah, if you'll give your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Okay. Yes, thank you. My name is Sarah Williams. I live in Councilmember James Brown's district. And I would just second, third, and fourth, and fifth everybody that went before me and everything that they said. Number one, yes, City Council needs to pass the ban on no-knocks. And yes, you do need to consider reinstating the 15-minute pause. You know, Amanda Bledsoe should most likely recuse herself from any future votes when it comes to police accountability in this city, considering her history of very intimate relationships with LPD. And I'm going to leave that at that. Y'all need to look further into that because it's a serious conflict of interest. It speaks to the why of how that amendment got put in at the end of the work session this week. Also, we need to fund a civilian liaison to the police department for the filing of formal complaints. As somebody who has filed multiple formal complaints against various problematic officers, I know that Officer Ingram and whoever else may be in his place at the moment who takes the complaints, they will not even accept a written, typed up form of what you bring in, telling your narrative of what occurred. They take whatever you give them and go type it up however they see fit, leaving out important information that has happened to me personally more than once, where I've had to handwrite in what it is I intended to say that was already appropriately recorded. So that needs to be looked at and addressed. And we also need to deal with the fact that, yes, even though all officers are going to have body cam starting July 1st, which I would like to note that is like, what, 4 or 5 years after the fact, when you claim to be, you know, so ahead of your time in getting body cameras, that we're going to actually have every officer equipped with a body camera. But we also need to address the policies when it comes to the retention of body camera footage. Because I know for myself and other people who were arrested over the summer, everything that has occurred with those arrests over the summer is equivalent to Bluegrass Conspiracy 2020 in this city, and has nothing to do with the veracity of charges that have been made against protesters, but has more to do with the obtaining of personal information and communications between myself and Jarvis Middleton, which I'm sure you all are going to find more out about because of the lawsuit that is in play. And the appeal that is coming up. But one of the things that is of concern is that the first time I was arrested, knocked to the ground, my glasses knocked off my face, a knee in my back, and told, be still or we'll tase you, that body camera footage no longer exists. And that's a problem. That's definitely a problem when LPD has been allowed to publish untrue information about me on the LexingtonKY.gov webpage. So if you already thought that the city of Lexington had enough lawsuits to deal with, get ready, it's not over. You all need to hold the Lexington Police Department accountable like you have the power to do. Mayor Gordon, you have the power within what has been granted you to restructure the entire police department instead of these piecemeals. Maybe we will take a step back. Bledsoe makes an amendment, not quite getting their moves. It's not doing it. It's going to cost the city dearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Kendra Long on?
No, ma'am, I just checked again.
Okie doke. Well, that ends our